What is up, my cutouts? Cardboard Ninja here, and I just happened to notice that MR.G dropped a cabin ranking list, ranking basically all the cabins using the S to D tier system instead of his previous like S to F tier some of the before. And yeah, I came across some things that I don't necessarily agree with. Surprising no one who actually views this channel. So I actually have a couple tier lists of my own. He brings up some interesting points, but long story short, I don't want to make a very long video. I'm gonna try and cut through what I believe important. Aggressor at D tier. No, not a D tier cabin. So the issue with the aggressor is that its perk he claims is difficult to activate. That's not true. There are actually ways to activate this perk very, very quickly, depending on if you're using buggy wheels or not, depending on whether or not you're using Bigfoot wheels or not. You can have this perk up very often. It's very easy to get to 7, if not 14% damage bonus. Getting a 21 can be very difficult and very unlikely. That's true. But this thing, again, you guys have ever seen my tier list know, this you can actually use this as a droner. You can as a higher build. You can do a lot of stuff with it. It's damage that's a 21% damage bonus. That's blanket. It's not bad. It is not a D tier cabin. Not by a long shot. It also has 105 kph top speed. No, wrong. Outright incorrect. The Cerberus being a D tier cabin, it is not a D tier cabin. D tier cabins are very, 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 very poor cabins. This is a C tier cabin. In my tier list, the reasons why he gives, I note myself. You get wedged yourself, it's used, things like that, certainly. But its stats are really good. Max cabin speed is really good. And it comes with 75% damage reduction to collision. Like, it is not a bad cabin. It's not D tier. D tier is abysmal. Plus C tier cabin, it can do something. Other cabins do it better, but this cabin seeks to do. But it still does what it's out to do, and it's definitely done. The Howl is a D tier cabin. The Howl as a D tier cabin. Oh, I can't even. The Howl is not a D tier cabin. It is very small. The cabin is only what 5 pins wide. It's a very, very small. It's not the smallest cabin, but it is very small. You can make very, very, very powerful builds with this. Very difficult to kill because of the fact that the cabin is so small. In addition to that, even though the stacking damage bonus that it receives is point blank range only, it's what do you think shotgunners are doing? Have you ever played Crossout? If you played Crossout, you know shotgunners are going to be within that range. So shotgunners take their strongest feature, being point blank range with you, and dealing boatloads of damage and just increasing that damage as the longer the fight goes. Shotguns usually end the fight instantaneously, but if they don't, that means that every iteration of rounds of shotguns that they fire into you, damage is higher. 20% gets up to 20% higher. That's ridiculously good. Yeah, it takes 10 seconds to get there, but it's very likely that you'll actually get there. They're right. The perk does drop off almost immediately because it drops off at double the rate of rate of gain. But yeah. Yeah, that's correct. Bad. I do want to cover this. I have a video where I rant for a good long time about the master cabin. In my light cabin tier list, I put this at S tier in the dark. I didn't know it was going to be D tier. I'm sorry, chat. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to my viewers, any new viewers. I was wrong. This is D tier. That's 100% D tier. It is a D tier cabin. 100% D tier cabin. This is splitting hairs. This is not a D tier. This is not a C cabin. It's a D tier. Splitting hairs. So we have the thug, which, no, it's not a C tier cabin.
We'll move on to better.
Right. It's not a C tier cabin. It's a bad cabin. Huntsman, bad cabin. Bear. I do agree with the bear being C tier. The bear is definitely C tier cabin. I believe he ranks the jockey as a C tier. Not too big. For what you get out of it, it's just too large. Jawbreaker being C tier, pretty much. That's on my point. Bastion being C tier, I disagree. Again, on my cabin tier list, I gave this B tier. The reason why I don't think this is a C tier is because the perk basically always works. You don't have to do anything for it. This thing can potentially double your hit points depending on how well you play. Difficult to use. Presently, even though this is one of my favorite cabins, I don't even have a build that uses it right now. But when it works, and you can produce some remarkably good builds. If you're, for example, Augur builds, there's a player in the game named Cap M Planet, and he's actually doing quite well in the arena at this moment because he sets himself up with this sweet front wedge, keeping him alive. Of course, the weakness of this build is energy damage, and energy meta is huge right now. That might feel like pushing it down, but in reality, the overwhelming vast majority do not deal one of the other. This can basically prevent most of that. Additionally, if you're seeking to make a super tanky build, you can shove an Averter on this. Mind you, it's only going to get up to 65% damage reduction with an Averter, and the reason for that is because it does iterative damage stacking, blah, blah, blah. But even still, it would mean that it covers the energy pool that you have over you would normally take full damage from Erling. This is definitely a B tier cabin. It's better than much better than C tier. C tier is something that does it, but there's other things that do it better. This tanks. It does it very well. Nothing in the game takes 50% damage off. Nothing. This does it very well. However, what it does isn't very good. That's the problem. C tier on the Ghost. Yeah, that's fair. C tier on the Step Spider. Yeah, sounds about right. The Tusk being C tier is interesting. So the thing is, this works with every weapon. So I'm going to cover this real fast. The Tusk does certain things that most people don't know. One, as I cover this in my tier list, you get 75% collision resistance to the whole cabin. It's not just little tips, which is what's brought up in this video. It's like, oh, it's so difficult to hit someone with these spikes to get the perk. That is not true. You do not need to hit someone with their spikes to deal your damage. You need to hit them with the cabin. The cabin itself, the entire thing, the whole hitbox from stem to stern, from top to bottom, that entire thing is the hitbox. What does that mean? Well, it means that if you slam into them with the side of your cabin, you still get the contact damage boost that this thing produces, which can be up to 300% doing that basic contact damage. You can ram people in half. There are booster sideways Tusks. They do exist. I didn't say they were good. They do exist. And when I was playing way back in the day, they'd boost across the battlefield and land on someone and instantaneously one-hit them. This changes your strike face from these little points and the front narrowness of the cabin to the massive side of the cabin. So just so we're clear, this is definitely not a C-tier cabin. Like, you can do a significant amount of stuff with this. You're never truly unarmed with this. And yeah, those people who dedicate their entire lives to using the Tusk actually end up doing very, very well for themselves. I gave it an A tier, maybe compromising a B tier, but it is definitely. Yokozuna is a interesting cabin. He gives it C tier. I disagree. So there's a couple things that are said during this video that I'd like to play, but I'll just summarize it. It goes a little something like this. They believe that Rotfish Bandit, you should have corrected him on this. He's saying that there's the perk is difficult to use, etc., because it generates a drone. Here's the deal. No, this cabin has 2 perks. It has 2. It's written right here. Upon activation, gives a bonus to power and maximum speed. Ignore this. Ignore everything after that. Turning this on, just pushing the button, regardless of whether or not the drone exists, is destroyed, can fit out the top, regardless of anything else, you get that bonus. You get that speed bonus. You get that power bonus. This is the #1 mind tug in the entire game, because entirely of the fact that you can pull people off their builds. You will overpower them with this cabin, 100%. This is actually the cabin with the most power in the game, with its bonus. And because of the fact that it changes the cabin's maximum speed, it also changes the cabin's acceleration. This is an amazing cabin. It is not C tier. It's a B tier cabin. Again, just like the Bastion before it. Well, why is it a B tier and not higher if it's so amazing? Because Mind Tugs have their limits. The build itself, it's good for one build. It's good for one build type. It does it exceptionally well, and it does it the best for that, but it's only good at that one thing. The second half of the perk is what they're complaining about, which is sending the drone to an ally that gives them the same speed and power bonus. Okay, that's difficult to activate, but you don't need to activate it. You get the perk. You get the perk for yourself just on activation. Think of that as an extra little boosty boost that you can just tag along. And, as I said earlier, stacks with the other stacks with other Janabis or Yokozunas. So basically, if you have like everyone with Yokozunas, you can shove all of those onto one Yokozuna, and that guy can shoot across the map like a bullet. B tier for the sprinter is ridiculous. There's no way this is a B tier cabin. It's a C tier. Doesn't have the power. It's slow. Your builds that you're gonna make are bad. B tier for the Fury is so impossible. This is not no. So they say it's the fastest cabin. This is true. That's great. The geometry is almost identical, if not completely identical, to the Gorilla, Huntsman, Thug, and Bear. But the problem is that the weld points, the hard points on this, are just flaming bad. They don't open up the weld points, I don't think, to let you see it. But the welding to this cabin, building with this cabin, is much more difficult than with the Bear. The difference of 5 kph top speed between the Bear and the Fury, I err to the side of the Bear. It's got higher mass limit, etc. But either way, this is definitely not B tier. At highest, it would be C, but I personally rank it well here personally. But anyway, the Hot Rod, B tier. No, C tier cabin. There's no way that this is that good. Not. It just isn't that good. It's a good cabin, not that good of a cabin. B tier for the Bat is ridiculous. In my top cabin tier list, there's only two light cabins at D tier because of their speed and what they can do for you. And this is one of them. There's no way. There is no way that this is B tier. This is not an upgrade to the Growl. In fact, Rotfish Bandit even brings that up. He even says it. He's like, this is not really an upgrade to the Growl. It's actually lateral. You get barely anything out of it. Yeah, there's a reason. This is terrible. The Bat is a terrible upgrade over the Growl. It isn't one. It isn't. And as something that's only basically almost a lateral side grade to its predecessor, it's B tier. It's no. B tier cockpit. B tier cockpit. B tier cockpit. This is an S tier cabin. You guys know it's an S tier cabin. B tier. B. 50% damage boost on everything that you do. Everything you touch. 50% damage. Any weapon in the game. 50% more booster. 2 perks simultaneously. This is the booster cabin of the Wasteland. That. You guys know it. It's got the best geometry in the game. It's 3 pins high. It's the lowest cabin in the entire game. B tier. No. Ridiculous. To be ridiculed. If I recall correctly, I put this at B tier, Dusk. No, I put it at C tier. So the reason why I put this at C tier is because the Dusk has its limits to only one weapon in the entire game. That weapon has limits to the power score that weapon is effective at. It's just one thing, one build. It's got one build, only one. Again, this is a C tier cabin. It's C tier because specifically it doesn't do anything other than the one thing that it does. The one thing that it does, not good. Favorite cabin. This is bare minimum A tier. It covers too many weapons too well. It buffs Retchers. 90 kilometers an hour. Great geometry. No. A tier. Disagree. Gotta disagree. They put the Janabi at B tier. Again, another A tier cabin. They put it B tier. You can almost always have this perk running at will. It's again 20% damage for anything. The only thing that keeps this cabin back is its reliance upon wheels. You can't put it on anything. Photon B tier. They undervalue its perk to keep it at B tier. That's all I can say about that. This is, in my opinion, an A tier cabin based on the fact that there are significant sum of energy weapons that all get a boost from this, provided you can heat them. And now with the release of the trombone, that solidifies it in A tier. Solidified, solid A tier cabin. No idea what they're talking about with that B tier. No idea. B tier Quantum. No, this is a terrible perk. It's a perkless cabin. First of all, the geometry is phenomenal. It is a straight upgrade to the Growl, yeah, but the problem is this is just a B tier cabin. My apologies. No, I agree with him. It is a B tier cabin. Whoops. Yeah, no, it's a B tier cabin. It's great, but it's got its major downsides. It's sad. The Duster, I really did in my tier list. I was gonna like low key give it a high rating. You know what? This thing is awesome. No, this thing is terrible. You can do little builds with it, but it's even with its max cabin speed, with its super mega abysmal power, you're never gonna get. any build with this. I gave it C tier only because of the fact that at one point in the game it was the best entire game ratio. But that's a long time. That is a long time. Not an A tier cabin. Do not go and get this if you're a new player. Next up goes to the Pilgrim. He puts this at A tier. It's not. It's a decent cabin for sure. Decent, but C tier at best. You can use a myriad of movement parts with it, etc., etc., etc. But what they don't mention is that this thing is one of the tallest cabins. It's 6 pins high. It's a huge target, a Methuselah of a target, no perk whatsoever, only an 11 energy. You can use a bevy of weapons with it, but I mean you can use a bevy of different builds with it, considering there has no perk you want with it. But it doesn't beat a lot of cabins. You're not looking to end game this. Not an A tier cabin. Wyvern at A tier. Disagree. It's a B tier cabin. Just like I disagree another upcoming cabin. This is not an in-game cabin. It's not something that you can ride the lightning with the entire time. It's a good cabin, solid cabin, but yep. No arguments here. Continue on with the Dead Man. Honestly, they rank it at A tier. I would put it at B tier. Sure. Either way, I mean, honestly, I still would stick by B tier only because of the fact that it's got a fading reload. It's a light cabin, so most reloading weapons are heavy, so it's really difficult to start getting getting more weapons on a build. But that actually plays to the favor, right? With the 25% reload with a weapon. So it means that you can grab a single weapon and make that one weapon super gooder, as it were. The Dead Man probably could go to A tier only because of the release of the trombone, honestly. Because if you had like a singular scorpion with this and a trombone, for example, you could, get 50%, 100% more damage from trombone. Effectively, the power of 2 whole weapons, reload speed. Well, that's only 15%. I don't know. Maybe it's only B tier because, again, the reasons that I gave for it being B tier are that weight holds it back, honestly. Echo at A tier. All right. So I was gonna mention this. My cabin tier list put this at S tier. It is. For a heavy cabin, it's S tier. For an overall cabin, it's A tier. So I agree. Once again, Icebox at S tier on my cabin list. This is true for heavy cabins when comparing heavy cabins against each other's heavy cabins, but A tier at best. Yeah, that's correct. There's no such thing as an S tier heavy cabin in Crossout, by the way. Unfortunately, heavy cabins 11 energy. Or speed in the game. Speed affects acceleration, all this mess, yada yada yada. So there is no truly such thing as an tier cabin. I'll put that in a update later. But when rated against other heavy cabins, this would normally be S tier. I agree, it's a cabin because Omnibox is A tier. Nah, again, my tier list put it at S tier because it affects every single weapon in the game. It has not only that, even if you have no weapons in the game, it affects your power. It's a perk that will always be on. It has 2 different perks that you choose at will, and it gives you the best bonuses that you could possibly imagine. And with 70 kph with its own perk, and on hover as well. It's an S tier cabin, even though it was begrudgingly so. I didn't know this was an S tier cabin, even though I had it. I didn't know it was an S tier cabin until I did my tier list and realized, no, this is the Call. They put this at A tier. What the hell are they thinking? Not an A tier. This is a B tier cabin. It does what it does. It can, but also in this list. I'm sorry, not in this list. In this video, they make statements about the Call, and they don't cover everything. Fortunately, I'll put a video up, be spliced in here, that shows that they're wrong. MR.G says, more drones you launch, the faster you are. That is not true. 85 kph top speed. That doesn't change. That is not true. Second half, they didn't bring up the damage resistance to your build. It does 2 things. It doesn't just do one thing. It does 2 things for your drones. And it doesn't, and the thing they said also is incorrect. It doesn't make you faster. It makes your build more powerful. This gives you push power, which allows you to push or drag someone or to get people out of your way and things like that. But it's not going to increase your top speed. It will increase your acceleration. And it gives you damage resistance up to 10%. I'm sorry, up to 30% because of the fact that it stacks. It's a B tier cabin because 85 kph is actually not fast enough for a drone cabin. If you've ever tried to be a droner at 85 kilometers an hour, you'll find out very rapidly a lot of people are a lot faster, and they're not going to let you walk away. Ferrero at A tier, I can see it, but I disagree. I put mine at S tier. It works with all weapons. Accuracy, shots. A tier cohort. Remember what I said earlier? There's no such thing as an S tier heavy cabin. That's true. Cohort is not an S tier or an A tier heavy cabin. Heavily disagree. Once again, they get the perk wrong. They assume that little drones launch out and give it to yourself. No, that's incorrect. What this does, and he also says it does what it says it does. This is also incorrect. So all of that wrong. Just so we're clear, this is, I'll just say it's a C tier cabin first of all because it's a tank cabin. It just tries to extend the lifespan of your build. It's more difficult to use than one would expect. But it does have some bonuses as a support build because of the fact that it also buffs your allies as long as they're within a very narrow range of you. It basically gives everyone some form of damage resistance. If you're in a medium or a light cabin, they get 10% for their whole build, not just their cabin. And it gives you yourself, I'm sorry, if they're heavy cabin, they get also 30%. And ignore the drones. This, again, has 2 perks. Ignore the drones. On activation, gives the cabin, that's the typo, it means your entire build. Like every part that you put on, whether it's a weapon, a movement part, frame, gives your entire build 30% damage resistance for 10 seconds with a 25-second cooldown. That's the first half. You always get that regardless of the drones. Regardless of drones, you will always get that. There's no way for anyone else to turn it off. You get it. Yours. In your pocket. Thumbs up. Then, if they're allies, then they get the drones. They get buffed. So, decent perk, but it's only C tier because it's only 30% damage resistance at max. And the cabin is huge. This cabin is a brick with awkward geometry. It's very, like, so just so everyone knows, like, in Crossout, you can't die unless damage is dealt directly to your cabin. With the largest cabin in the game, that is to your detriment. A killing blow is almost always guaranteed to be almost a first try against a cabin of this size. You're not going to miss a cabin that size. Harpy at A tier, disagree. It's S tier cabin. This thing has 2 perks. And both perks are phenomenal, and they both synergize with each other. Only 2 weapons don't synergize with their own perks. One's the Reaper, and the other one's the one that I don't remember off the top of my head. My apologies. This is a phenomenal, phenomenal, phenomenal perk. Double perk. The explosion radius allows you to do mine layers. It allows you to do all sorts of stuff. Believe it or not, this is probably going to be really, really, really cancerous with the new Invisidrone that you poop out that drills into people. Like, Harpy's S tier, not A tier, but we're splitting hairs. We're splitting hairs. S tier Growl. It's wrong. B tier. Sorry. You don't take this to end game. There's no end game build with this. This is the go-to cabin of Crossout, right? It'll take you far. It'll take you really far. But there are limits to what a rare cabin will do, and the limits there is B tier. Like, you don't go higher than B tier with a rare cabin. Like, you don't. You don't. So Humpback at S tier. No. Again, there's no such thing as an S. There is no such thing as an S tier heavy cabin. This is a myth. Letter is incorrect. Wrong. Highest this could be is A tier. I rank this as A tier on my heavy cabin list, and I'd leave it at A tier on this list as well. It's great. It is a great cabin. It's not S tier. You do not want to go to the end game with this cabin. You don't. It has some decent builds. Even Rotfish says in this video, maybe it's A tier. Maybe I'm biased. He's biased because he's got the best Humpback builds in the entire game. And in his hands, this is a nightmare to fight. It's a nightmare to fight. But even still, it's not an S tier cabin. Like, he's taking something out of the dregs and dragging it up into the top of the mountain. So again, like, just for those of us who don't know, you can get up to 30% damage as people damage your build. Great. What is not mentioned is that damage, what they did mention for the Howl, but didn't mention for the Humpback, is that damage bonus drops off. It drops off pretty damn fast. You have to be consistently taking damage, constantly being hit to keep this at 30%. And that's difficult. If you're the focus of a team, if a dedicated group of people is trying to power you down, you're going to get 30% more to your guns, but you're not going to be around for very long. And there are hard counter to this meta. The hard counter now is the Destructors, of course. Energy weapons will tear this cabin apart because you usually run it exposed because you're trying to get it hit. Yeah, well, energy weapons will burn right through it. S tier Griffin, correct. Easy S tier. Basically the 3rd or 4th best cabin in the entire game. S tier Beholder, easy correction. No, yeah, 100% correct. Yeah, it's either if not the best cabin in the game, it's number 1 or 2, and you're looking at the other number 1 or 2. It's pretty much easiest S tiers of my life, right? Hadron, which is the final cabin, I in the dark still put it at A tier, but it is possibly S tier. Again, Rotfish is trying to find out whether or not this perk makes it so Scorpions no longer are precision weapons and are just pure DPS weapons. If that happens, it happens. Would that make this an S tier cabin? Maybe, maybe. But just from the look and the sleekness of it, this is actually going to replace my personal favorite cabin, which is the Step Spider. Step Spider is my personal favorite cabin at C tier, all the way down there, just because of how it looks. This thing looks like the Step Spider. It looks just like a sleeker, sexier Step Spider. So for me, this is going to replace that as my favorite cabin. But this thing's got phenomenal stats. Like, its stats are up there. It's got that mass. It's got that mass limit. It's got reload time. It's basically everything I want in a heavy cabin, except it's a medium cabin. Are the big cabins. So if it ends up S tier, it would not end up in the top 3 cabins because of the fact that if you've seen the ability to go invisible or the ability to keep yourself off radar, you would know this is that outshines reload, even though it's a lot better reload. That does outshine. And you have to pay for that. You pay with energy because you have to put a weapon that you invisibility and so forth. So it's going to be an entirely different meta to even assume that this would be S tier. And the current meta as of 2022, this would be more or less an A tier cabin, potentially S tier cabin if it ends up being that oppressive with its reload, but a reload boost. But even then, like, you'd have to put it on like or Moon or things like that to try and eke out a faster reload. I don't know. A tier in the dark for me, which I believe even they went and said, but you know, I don't know if it's maybe it is. Maybe it is. You know what? I'm gonna call it right here. I'm gonna say it's S tier. No, I'm not. I already did that once. I fucked up. I did that with the Master Cab. Got that wrong. All right. Anyway, I just wanted to bang this video for you guys. Any new players that saw MR.G's YouTube, go ahead and look at my tier lists, only because of the fact that I disagree. I disagree with a lot of this stuff and that. But you got some of it right, especially the final ones, because you know if you're gonna get S tier, at least get these S tier ones correct. But anyway, take it easy, YouTube. Peace.